Well, good afternoon. I'm Carl Rosman, one of the clarinet players with the ELISION Ensemble. My mission for today is to say a few words about Evan Johnson's piece for contrabass clarinet ground, probably in particular with reference to instrumental techniques that might be special in this piece. There's a score there. You might have to take it apart and disperse it around the assembled multitudes. You would have on average like 2 pages each or so. Is that the plan? And if you have the dispersed fragments of the score, then you'll be following it all the way through. My plan is also good. I suppose there are plenty of contemporary music pieces where you've got basically what seems to be a perfectly normal piece of music with, you know, the extended instrumental techniques are kind of sprinkled over the top. This is one of them, but the sprinkling process is quite an interesting one, I find. Were Evan here, he'd be able to say a lot more about the compositional process than I can, but his music is very caught up with traditional contrapuntal procedures, canons in particular, and what happens quite a lot in this piece is that canonic procedures are applied not only to the notes that are passing through the clarinet, but to the ornamental layers that are to some extent superimposed over the top. It's a little bit, sometimes it's a bit ambiguous then, since he does turn one layer into another in that kind of way. Sometimes it's a bit ambiguous when these instrumental ornaments based on instrumental technique are actually part of the line, and when they are a separate layer. This kind of ambiguity is exactly the kind of thing that Evan deals with in practically every piece, I think. What you'll see once you get a squeeze at the score, there are 3 particular layers of material that he puts on top of the pitch material. Those are different ornaments to do with the mouthpiece, the position of the mouthpiece in the mouth, the tightness of the embouchure on the mouthpiece, and a special case of this where the teeth are placed on the reed. Those techniques through the piece pop up in little more or less audible ways, and in the case of the mouthpiece, position in the mouth, also visible ways. Of course, the instrument has to move. And in several places in the piece, they take on a life of their own, as in there are a couple of pages where only these kind of instrumental ornaments are happening. The idea being that those instrumental ornaments also in that particular moment are not to be performed over a breath stream that one superimposes on them. Those ornaments are intended to happen to the instrument in such a way that as they have finally come to the surface of the texture, they actually fade from audibility. Not quite completely, but almost so in the case of some of them. So you'll find during the course of the piece that various kinds of those techniques I've described, and also a reasonably standard smorzato pulsing technique, pop through the material or through the pitch material or are submerged under it. The pitch material comes from stormy weather apparently, but it's quite cunningly obscured. I might as well play the thing. Oh, I suppose I should say the idea of using more or less antiquated contrapuntal procedures in the music, he does apply that to the instrumental texture in such a way that the information on the page is sometimes getting on for paradoxical. So there are canonic lines are distributed for the clarinet in such a way that the clarinet can't actually play notes simultaneously. So occasionally he writes in the score little suggestions as to how to negotiate the simultaneous sounding of lines that are present at the same time. That's something he's been doing in his clarinet music for quite a while now, and lots of his other music as well, I'm sure, but it's the clarinet music I play. Anyway, I'll play at least some of it. If I feel inspired, I might play all of it. Gather my thoughts. So, I suppose any questions for among those who look at the score as to how much of that sort of stuff is as to how the detail that's on the score translates into, well, how it comes off the score into my head, and how it comes out of my head through the instrument, and how it comes from the instrument through to the audience.
Especially interested in your head and your body. Like just if you could say more about what the process of interpretation is more generally, including, in a traditionally musical sense, but also just how you prioritize the information, the specifically rhythmic language, and then of course also the overlaying of different techniques.
I think Evan, among all the composers who like to present performance with more information than is simply realisable in the performance moment, Evan is one of the kinder and more trusting. As in, it's not simply a matter of here is some compositional material and the performer may or may not be able to realise it. It's more a matter of here is some compositional material and the way you realise it is actually important to me in how it comes out. It's not. There are pieces in the repertoire that, for example, one of which one could do an electronic realisation, and that would in some way, be a valid representation of the piece in Evan's music, at least the solo clarinet music and the solo voice music. That's certainly not the idea. The idea that there is some kind of filtering going on is very present. In this piece, precisely because we have these overlays of material that go, the pitch material is relatively straightforward, except perhaps for the fact that sometimes there are several independent lines going on in the instrument, or at least going on the page. Maybe I'll get away from the word ornamental, but the articulation material that is then superimposed on that material, it is to some extent, yes, a matter of prioritising how those things are realised in performance and preparation. And in particular, with the knowledge that at some point, all that's on the page is going to be this articulative material without anything to articulate. And that's a different matter he has a voice piece, for example, where there are lines dealing with the pitch produced by the throat. There are lines dealing with what the breath is up to. And there is pitch material in the same place, but sometimes the pitch material disappears, and all that's left is the more or less visible, especially now with a beard. When I premiered it, I was clean shaven. But the more or less visible movement of the apparatus, or at least the idea that part of the way the piece comes across is the fact that one is hanging on for something that is maybe there, is maybe not there, and even the performer, but I don't know to what extent the movement of my larynx is visible, and it doesn't really matter. In fact, that's a very nice thing about it, that I'm doing something. I know I'm doing something. You know I'm doing something. What am I doing? And the fact that a piece that is built on reasonably traditional pitch structures can turn into that kind of experience is to me very interesting.
Is there a kind of rule of thumb, though, as to how, when you're approaching this for the first time, what sorts of things do you look for to hang on to? Which things are the ones that you feel are the irreplaceable bulwarks or something of the experience? How do you select those sorts of things?
Let's see. There are always moments in the piece where it's obvious what's going to happen and it's predictable. The result is more or less predictable, and those moments can just sit there and happen. Yes, that is exactly the thing, and that is, to me, also a reasonably spontaneous thing, how the experience goes between those poles of here is a pitch, here is a duration, they are realisable, and here is something that is more or less completely metaphorical. And how those things, that depends to me, maybe that's a reason I find this music so grateful to perform, despite what it looks like on the page, that to me it is a very interesting matter of what kind of feedback I perceive from the audience, how I feel the experience is going for all concerned. If it may be that I'm thinking that the audience needs a little bit more to hang on to in some kind of traditional way, then I might prioritise the pitch argument in some in a certain passage. If I think, okay, they know these pitches, they've come back several times, I hope that was perceptible at least, that there are various patterns that reappear in I suppose is appropriate when writing a piece that is in some way a tribute to a song which has verses. There is pitch material that recurs. The material, the articulative material superimposed on the pitches may be the same. It often is, but I will very probably weight it differently as the piece goes on. Certainly, I played the piece in Harvard recently. We had a general rehearsal and then we had the concert. They were on the day. They were a couple of hours apart. I'm very interested in the recordings to see how different they are. Because when one is for 2 or 3 colleagues sitting in the audience who may or may not actually just want to get on with their piece, and when it's with an audience that is behaving a little bit more traditionally as an audience, then the procedure, as far as I'm concerned, happens quite differently, but not necessarily consciously differently. But in the score, at least, it does say ideally this will be left to the moment of performance rather than preparation with certain of those parameters.
Carl, it's interesting to me because I've obviously had the pleasure of being at the Harvard performance.
Were you at the Huddersfield one as well? I've forgotten.
I was at Huddersfield, but
Yep. So you've heard me do it 3 times, 4 times now?
The Harvard one and this one are memorable. The Huddersfield one was kind of swamped out to me. I think the acoustic dimension and proximity play a really big part in how the audience can engage with that work. And I just found that just hearing a stack of stuff, an enormous amount of intricacies, we're sitting at the rear of a much bigger wall. Done. So I'm just wondering whether or not everyone would reflect upon the generalised way about a kind of performance, circumstance, and ideal space for this. I know it does for some of these repertoire.
I don't think there's anything specified in the score as to what is ideal. Like we may have discussed the possibility of reinforcing it in Huddersfield, in that church. But we didn't end up doing it. We may have discussed that possibility.
Because I think intimacy is just fabulous.
Oh, it's interesting actually. To me, it's as a performer with the voice piece, maybe even more so. It's also for me as though I'm standing at a distance from what is actually going on, and that I have a little bit of that audience experience. What is actually happening here? But it's something that's actually happening inside my body, which is an interesting sensation for a performer to be
disembodied.
confronted with that at this stage of their career, put it that way.
Could you give us an example of what you've been talking about? Maybe a very small segment of this is for well-behaved audience, this is for this is for suspect audience.
Well, you may have to help me with this experiment. In fact, let's do this properly. So, okay, so the first time maybe, be a bit more empathetic. Just sit back in your seats. See, okay. Be a challenging audience. The second time, sit forward and... Yeah, there we go. The first time is the bad audience, and the second time is the good audience. Wait, I have to be able to see these very small dots. Yep, step forward. Sounded different. To me, I guess, privilege the articulations and so on. I don't know if that was apparent. I think I probably found myself conscious of doing it towards the end of the second one, to be thinking, okay, with the thought of, okay, those pictures, I've put them out there, they will probably be apparent, especially since I'm playing it for the second time. Brian.
Carl, when you're dealing with quite a long piece, but you're engaged in all this detailed production, your body is moving onto the next thing each time. How do you access the sort of larger scale aspect of the piece?
That certainly varies from piece to piece as to how the larger scale structure is apparent to me. It's an interesting question because sometimes, of course, one consciously thinks, okay, I'm at this point of the piece, I'm reaching the golden section about now, so I'll look for something special. No, not really. But Harry Galonis calls it the Brontosaurus form, yes. Thin at one end, very big in the middle, and thin again at the other end. Where one locates oneself in that curve over the course of the piece, that is sometimes a conscious thing. With a piece like this, specifically like this one, where so much recurs, for me sometimes it's interesting to get lost in it. And sometimes it's interesting to try and carry the tension across the piece in a more, as more of a single arch than to let it come and go. So it depends, it varies, I think.
But if there were 30 little fragments, say, maybe you could do them indoors, something like that. 30 different fragments, obviously individual. Would you approach the playing of them any differently with respect to, it seems techniques are the same. Would you approach it any differently from the performer point of view?
If there were 30 different fragments as opposed to verses?
As opposed to sort of oceanic type waveform.
Well, there's a repertoire piece where that issue comes up, which is the Boulez Domaine, where the piece is laid out extremely impractically across several pages, and it is necessary for the performer to make some decisions differently in, say, part 4 of the piece, depending on how the performer did them in part 4 when the performer was playing the same piece in the opposite order, that kind of thing. And there also it depends. I've done performances of that piece where, as far as I was concerned, I was trying to make an arch of the thing, and I've done performances of that piece where I was trying to bring out the bricks, the separate structures of it. To me, that is one of the important interpretative parameters, how to project structure, in what way to project structure, because of course compositionally as well, it's not a single parameter, is it? Is this a continuous thing? Yes, but it's also articulated, as we all are. And so to what extent to bring out the joins is, to me, an interesting interpretive question. It will vary, certainly in one piece, from performance to performance, that will vary. Time and Motion 1, for example, how much I'll push the sections apart.
So you do feel there's that individual performer choice, as it were? You react to the circumstances? I
do, yes. Whether that's intellectually lazy or not, I don't know. But to me, that is one of the things about interpretation, a very important one, I think. To what extent one, as a performer, engages with the form when, in theory, the form is there already in the dots. But only in theory, I think. But I certainly heard, when I was at university still, I heard Bartok Kagan play I think it was a C.P. Bach sonata. And at one point, there was a restatement of some ritornello or other, and just the way he held back the beginning of it, at very most it would have been a tenth of a second, but in that moment he had the audience go from there to there. It was quite a lesson in interpretation. And there's a clear form, and okay, here comes there we go, and just making the audience want it a little bit more. That was a fairly amazing lesson. Do we need to let Ben have a go? We do, don't we?
Ben? This isn't a soft piece.
Are there any further urgent questions while Ben is?
Maybe.
I'm sure we'll all have chances to converse over the next couple of days, few days. How long are we still here for, days? Another 5 days?
Yeah, we leave on Thursday.
Thursday. What day is it today?
Friday.
Friday. Oh, very good. So anyway, I shall pass the metaphorical baton.